Alina Carter, an African-American lawyer, steps into Willow and Bloom, hoping to find something special for her recent promotion. As she moves toward the racks, she feels the weight of the stares from the sales associate, Samantha, and her colleague, Jessica. Before Alina can fully immerse herself in the shopping experience, Samantha approaches, her expression stern. "I'll need to hold onto your bag while you shop. It's store policy to check customer bags," she says, her tone leaving no room for discussion. Alina glances around, noticing other shoppers moving freely, their bags untouched. "I didn't see anyone else having to do that," Alina replies calmly, though her heart sinks. "It's just a precaution," Samantha insists, extending her hand. Reluctantly, Alina hands over her bag, aware that she's being singled out. Jessica stands a few feet away, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Alina as if waiting for her to make a misstep. The message is clear. Alina is not welcome, and they suspect her of theft before she's even begun. If you want to know what happened next and how everything unfolded, make sure to like and click on that subscribe button to get more amazing stories like this. Alina walked across the boutique, her footsteps echoing through the spacious, elegantly designed store. Jessica trailed behind her, clutching Alina's handbag as if it were a trophy. Alina's mind raced as she tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling growing in her chest. She needed to push through. She was here to enjoy her day, not to deal with the blatant hostility. She stopped at a clothing rack, picking up a sleek black dress that caught her eye. As she held it up against her frame, she turned to Jessica, hoping to get some feedback. "What do you think of this one?" she asked, trying to keep her voice friendly. But Jessica didn't answer. Instead, she merely glanced at the dress with a look that seemed almost dismissive, her lips pressed tightly together. There was no enthusiasm, no desire to help, just a cold silence. Alina felt the sting, but chose not to engage. She picked another outfit, a striking red blouse that would look great for an upcoming dinner meeting. "This one's beautiful, don't you think?" She tried again, still hoping for some acknowledgement. Jessica's response was the same. Utter silence. The blatant disregard for her as a customer was impossible to ignore now. The staff wasn't even pretending to be courteous. It was clear they were treating her differently, but Alina pushed forward, refusing to show them how deeply the racism cut. After a few more moments of browsing, Alina decided on a dress. A dark green, tailored piece that would be perfect for a business event. She took it to the fitting rooms, hoping to escape the watchful eyes for a moment. As Alina pulled the fitting room curtain closed, ready to change, the door swung open without warning. Jessica stood there, eyes narrowed, blocking the entrance. "You'll have to change in front of everyone," she said, her voice cold. "We can't trust you in there." Alina froze, disbelief coursing through her. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp now. "What did you just say?" Jessica's eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. "If you have nothing to hide, why not change out here where we can see you? You're not trustworthy." The words hung in the air like a slap across her face. Alina felt the heat of frustration flood her chest, but she held it back, choosing not to escalate things in that moment. "I'd like to speak to the manager," she said, voice trembling with controlled anger. The store manager, Mr. Collins, appeared moments later, a look of annoyance crossing his face as he saw Alina standing in the fitting area. Without waiting for her to speak, he glanced briefly at Jessica and Samantha, giving them a subtle nod of approval. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Collins asked, his tone dismissive as he turned toward Alina. Alina tried to remain composed. "Yes, there is a problem. I've been treated unfairly by your staff. They've been incredibly rude and disrespectful. I was told I couldn't change in private and that I had to do it in front of everyone." Mr. Collins didn't seem to take her complaint seriously. He sighed, clearly impatient. "Well, if you have nothing to hide, why would you mind changing in front of others?" His words stung, and Alina felt her heart race. The support for his staff was evident, and he wasn't even trying to understand her side. "I do mind," Elena replied, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about changing clothes. It's about the way I've been treated. I'm a paying customer, and I deserve respect." Mr. Collins crossed his arms, clearly uninterested in hearing her out. "Look," he said, his tone cold, "if you're not doing anything wrong, what's the issue? Just change and we can all move on." Elena stood frozen in disbelief, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The store manager, Mr. Collins, had just supported his staff's demand that she change in front of everyone, and she had reached her breaking point. With her heart racing, she took the dress she had tried on and, in a moment of anger and frustration, dropped it on the counter. "I'm done," she muttered, turning toward the door. The idea of staying in a place that had treated her like this was unbearable. But as she reached for the exit, she was stopped by Samantha and Jessica. "You can't leave," Samantha said, her voice sharp, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What do you mean I can't leave?" Elena asked, confusion and anger bubbling up inside her. "I'm done. I don't want anything here. I'm leaving." Jessica stepped forward, blocking the door. "We're not letting you walk out without paying," she said, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Elena's brow furrowed. "I haven't taken anything," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't even want the clothes anymore." But before Elena could say anything else, Mr. Collins stepped forward, his face hardening. "It's not about what you want. It's about what you've done. I think you've taken something." Elena felt a surge of panic. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" "Yes," Mr. Collins replied coldly. "You need to prove you haven't." With a swift movement, he called out to Samantha and Jessica. "Call Officer Roberts. We're not letting this slide." Moments later, the door opened, and the boutique sound system blared with an emergency alert, an alarm signaling that all customers must vacate the store. Elena stood frozen, bewildered by what was happening. She had been accused of theft, and now she was being forced to prove her innocence in front of the entire store. The humiliation was overwhelming. Before she could react, Officer Roberts arrived, walking into the boutique with a stern expression. He immediately took in the scene, glancing at the staff before his eyes landed on Elena. Without hesitation, he turned to Mr. Collins, who was now standing next to Elena, looking at her with disdain. "She looks guilty," Officer Roberts said, his voice harsh. "She has the look of a thief. You should have stopped her earlier." His eyes then turned back to Elena, scanning her up and down, clearly sizing her up. "What's going on?" Elena asked, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Why am I being treated like this? I haven't stolen anything. This is outrageous." "You've been acting suspicious," Officer Roberts said, as if his words were fact. "And if you're innocent, you'll prove it." His gaze hardened. "We need you to undress. Show us you're not hiding anything. If you don't, you won't be allowed to leave, and you'll be arrested for theft." Elena's mouth went dry, and her heart pounded in her chest. The terror she felt wasn't just from being accused of something she didn't do. It was the degrading, humiliating demand that she strip in front of these people. She stood frozen, her mind racing. "I'm not undressing in front of anyone," she said, her voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong. This is ridiculous." Officer Roberts stepped closer, his expression unyielding. "You either undress or you don't leave. It's as simple as that. We'll call the police and make sure you don't walk out of here. If you don't comply, things will get bad for you." Elena felt trapped. The manager, the staff, and now the officer were all united against her, each pushing her further into a corner. Her pulse raced, her thoughts scattered. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their hostility pressing down on her. 3 against 1. She could barely breathe. The pressure became unbearable. Officer Roberts continued to stand there, his stance unwavering, his eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction as he waited for her to give in. The humiliation was growing worse with each passing second. Elena's mind raced. There was no way out. She was cornered, and if she didn't comply, she would be dragged out in front of everyone, arrested for a crime she hadn't committed. With a shaky breath, Elena reluctantly started to undress, feeling her dignity slip away with each piece of clothing she removed. She didn't know what else to do. The fear, the shame, the violation of her privacy, all of it felt suffocating. As she stood there in front of the staff and Officer Roberts, she could hear the officer's lecherous comments, the way he shifted his stance, his gaze lingering over her in ways that made her skin crawl. "Turn around," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Let's make sure we've got nothing hidden." Elena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She turned around slowly, her body trembling. The officer's eyes followed her movements, his lips curving into a grin. She could hear him lick his lips, the sickening sound echoing in the room. The humiliation was unbearable. Elena wanted to disappear, to escape from the eyes that were judging and mocking her. She could feel her body shaking, her emotions raw, but she stood there, frozen, knowing there was nothing she could do to stop this nightmare. As Elena stood at the door, ready to leave, her heart sank. Officer Roberts stepped forward, blocking her way once again. "You're not going anywhere," he stated firmly. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? I've done everything you've asked. I undressed. I showed you I didn't steal anything." The officer didn't move, his gaze hard. Mr. Collins, the manager, now stepped in. "She's trying to leave with stolen goods," he said, his tone flat, as if the accusation had already been decided. Elena's stomach twisted. "What stolen goods?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I've paid for nothing. I dropped everything and told you I didn't want to buy anything anymore." "Well," Mr. Collins said coolly, "the shirt in your bag, that one." He pointed to her purse. Elena's eyes widened in shock. "A shirt?" She opened her bag and looked inside. Sure enough, there was a shirt in there, a shirt she hadn't picked out. She had no idea how it got in there, but it was clear now that it had been planted. "This is a setup," Elena exclaimed, her voice trembling with anger. "I didn't put this in my bag. One of your staff must have done this. You've been watching me the entire time." Officer Roberts didn't flinch. "I don't care how it got there," he said harshly. "You're under arrest for theft." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "You're coming with me." Elena was handcuffed and escorted out of the boutique, the cold metal biting into her wrists as the officer led her to his car. She tried to gather her thoughts, but the world felt like it was spinning out of control. How had it come to this? What had she done to deserve this? As they were driving, Elena's phone rang loudly from her bag. She winced at the sound, but Officer Roberts didn't let up. "You can't take calls right now," he said, his voice harsh. "Shut it off." Elena could hear the persistent ringing continuing, each call more urgent than the last. It was a number she recognized, but she couldn't place it. Her heart raced. It was important. She needed to answer. "Please, can I just take the call?" she asked, her voice pleading. Roberts scoffed and shook his head. "Keep quiet." But as the calls grew more persistent, Elena's phone was grabbed from her bag by the officer, and he put it on speakerphone without warning. Elena could barely breathe as she heard a woman's voice on the other end. "Elena?" the woman asked, her tone urgent. "Where are you? Your father has been trying to reach you. He's worried sick." Elena's heart dropped. Her father, the Vice President of the United States. She was barely holding it together, but she knew this was her chance to get some help. "I'm in handcuffs," Elena said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm at Willow and Bloom Boutique. They've accused me of stealing. They've been treating me horribly." On the other end of the line, the woman's voice shifted to one of recognition and urgency. "Don't move. I'm forwarding this to the Chief of Police. Stay where you are. Help is on the way." Before Elena could say another word, she heard the line click, and then the woman's voice was replaced by another, a man's. This is Chief Williams. I've been alerted to the situation. Officer Roberts, you are to release Miss Carter immediately. I'm sending a unit over to you now. Elena's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. The power of her father's position was in play now. She could feel her pulse slow, the weight of the situation settling into her chest. The officer, seemingly caught off guard, stammered. Chief, I didn't mean to. Roberts started, but his words were interrupted. You didn't mean to? Chief Williams' voice was sharp, cutting through the officer's feeble excuses. You abused your power, Roberts. You violated her rights, and right now, you have no authority over her. You're to release her at once. If you don't, you'll face charges. You'll be in prison for the rest of your life. Elena's breath caught in her throat, hearing those words. For the first time since this nightmare started, she felt a flicker of hope. The car screeched to a halt in front of the boutique. Officer Roberts hesitated, looking at Elena, who was still in handcuffs. I don't know what to do, he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, a police car pulled up behind them, and Chief Williams himself got out. Elena watched as he approached, his eyes hard with authority. Release her, Roberts, Chief Williams commanded, his voice ringing through the air. Now. Roberts, face pale, unlocked the handcuffs and let Elena go without another word. Her heart was racing, but she felt the weight lift off her shoulders as the officer backed away, his face filled with regret. Now, Chief Williams said, turning to face Mr. Collins and the rest of the staff, you're all in serious trouble. This is abuse of power. Miss Carter is the vice president's daughter, and you have no idea what you've done. The manager, Mr. Collins, and the staff were stunned, their faces pale with shock as they realized the gravity of their actions. We didn't know, Mr. Collins stammered. Please, we're sorry. We have children at home to feed. Please, forgive us. But Elena stood tall, her anger barely contained. You should have thought of that before you abused me, she said, her voice cold and final. You need to face the consequences for your actions, so your children will know that racism has consequences. The staff, including Samantha and Jessica, all looked down, ashamed, as they pleaded with her for forgiveness. But Elena wasn't done. You've caused me pain, humiliation, and terror today, she said. You don't get to walk away from this without learning something. Your children need to know the truth about how racism affects people. They need to understand that actions have consequences, and this isn't something to brush aside. With that, Elena turned and walked out of the boutique, leaving behind the stunned faces of the staff and a police officer who would soon have to answer for his actions.